He is so comfortable in the chaos that he can blow it all up and then have the confidence that I'm actually going to be able to pick out the best path forward while everyone else is running around in a state of panic.
Hi, and welcome to the Debrief. I'm Donna King, Editor-in-Chief of Carolina Journal. Of course, joining us this week, we have Mitch Kokai from the John Locke Foundation and Jeff Moore, Deputy Editor of Carolina Journal. So one of the big things we're talking about this week, tariffs. Everybody's talking about it. North Carolina, we're square in the crosshairs here of what tariffs could mean. We're watching the White House really closely right now. Countries with large trade deficits on Wednesday had some tariffs enacted, but then immediately rolled back to 10%. So we're going to be talking more about that and what it means for North Carolina and some of the big picture ideas of what a free market economy is and how tariffs would fit into it, whether it's a fairness issue. I want to know what you think. So if you're in agriculture, biotech, manufacturing, I mean, pretty much anything in North Carolina's economy would be really impacted by tariffs. Tell us what you think. Post a comment below. Make sure you follow us. We're going to be talking a lot about this as it unfolds. Is this the way to go? Is this fairness for generosity, people taking advantage of America's generosity, or is this just bad policy? What's the latest? Tell me what you think.
So obviously with the kind of the pause, the 90-day pause, you had some are calling it capitulation by Trump after looking at some things and having probably some of his faction in the White House point to some reasonable kind of worrying factors here with the bond market, and obviously the stock market's been on a roller coaster ride.
Right.
And then on the other side of the ledger, you have people who think, well, this was the plan all along. And drive a really, really hard bargain.
Chip,
And he is a master negotiator, so it's up for debate, like whether that was on purpose or that was part of the plan or it wasn't. But that part doesn't matter as much as the tangible part, which is that there's a 90-day pause on some of these excessive tariffs. It should be noted that even with the pullback, those 70, 75 countries that he mentioned, they got the pullback, but it's still a 10% minimum tariff. So that's still a pretty far a move from where we were just several weeks ago. Like, these are levels of tariffs that are still at the level of Smoot-Hawley in the 30s there.
Tell us about Smoot-Hawley. That is actually an important point to make.
Yeah, so like we all learned about the Great Depression growing up, and as if you get further and further into learning about policy and history and the economic history of the United States, at some point you learn about the Smoot-Hawley tariffs, which were credited or blamed with maybe kicking off or extending the length of the Great Depression, just because it interrupted international trade so much, and people started getting more and more insular. And that is, some argue that would extend the Great Depression years beyond what it actually may have been otherwise. But yeah, so this is the last historical reference point we really have for tariffs of this level are those tariffs. But certainly moving in the right direction. The market seemed to like it. Had a record-setting day when that news came. So it was a huge blast off. I used to be an equity trader, so it's like a short squeeze is what that was. The market had been going down a lot. People positioned looking like it was going to continue down, and so when news like that comes out, they all race to cover their butts, and you see the market do what it did.
Where does it stand right now? So 10% for most?
And then they actually upped. They're tightening the screws on China. So that has gone up to 124%. I actually saw on a headline on one of the TVs coming over to the studio a number of 154%, and so I'm wondering if, as we're talking, there's some extra a tariff that's been levied.
Trump tweeted something else, or
exactly. A new Truth Social. So yeah, it's all extremely fluid, and you've seen that in the markets where they've just been all over the place. These huge down days, these huge upswings. But right now, 10% across the board for all of these countries. They've got 90 days to renegotiate trade deals. If we can end in a place where most countries in the world have free trade deals going on with the United States, then that should be a positive result if you get less tariffs overall. Of course, China has been relatively isolated. You have a lot of people coming to the table to negotiate with the United States and say, hey, let's make this deal and make it right. Meanwhile, China is under more and more pressure and vowing to quote-unquote fight till the end. So you have huge geopolitical concerns going on here, economic concerns obviously, but it appears that cooler, more reasonable heads may prevail on most of the tariff arrangements with a lot of other countries. So we'll have to wait and see over the next several days in a couple of months to really see how that shakes out.
Yeah, of course. Mitch, one of the things that we've heard a lot about is about fairness. That the United States has been so generous and prosperous that other countries are just taking advantage. But the fairness issue, you and I are going to be the one that pay for it when we go to buy a car or buy groceries or whatever it is. Can you kind of help me hash out this fairness issue versus tariffs?
Sure. The tariff issue, first of all, tariffs are always bad. I mean, I work for the John Locke Foundation, a free market group, where of course we're going to say tariffs are bad.
Right.
They never are good because you're basically saying we're going to punish these other countries by having our consumers pay more.
Right.
I mean, if you looked at Carolina Journal, there's a recent cartoon where there's a person standing there looking at all these goods on the shelf that are now much more expensive and saying, take that, China.
Right.
Like, well, okay, but you're the one that's having to pay for it. And while it's not officially a tax, it is, in essence, another tax. It's like if you go to a store, buy a good, you're paying a sales tax, which increases the price. If you're going to the store or ordering online and buying a good and it costs more because of the tariff than it would otherwise, that's like a tax. And so it's been estimated that this would cost the average North Carolina family, the average American family, thousands of dollars a year in extra payments for the same goods that you were buying before. Now, obviously, as Jeff was alluding to, there is all kinds of political gamesmanship involved, and it's entirely possible that Donald Trump and his team went into this thinking, look, we face tariffs from other countries. Let's sock it to these other countries, say, we're going to level tariffs on you, and then have them come back and say, no, okay, let's get free trade deals. And if you end up with freer trade after the end of all of this mess, that could be a good thing.
Sure.
But it's not entirely clear that that's really what the plan is. The way that President Trump has gone about this, where he has announced these tariffs, then he rolls it back or puts them on pause. He says we're going to have tariffs against our adversaries like China, but also against our friendly neighbors, Mexico and Canada.
Yeah, they're still at like 25%.
Right, and also the European Union, which has traditionally been an ally. So it's not entirely clear that there really is a well thought out plan on this. And it also seems fairly likely, based on what Donald Trump has said about tariffs over the years, not just since he's returned to office, but what he said when he was in office the first time, what he has said on other occasions, that he likes tariffs. He actually thinks it's a good, and that it helps the United States to have these tariffs and will help bring manufacturing back to the U.S. or bring other goods back to the U.S. Among the things that he is looking at for the economy, it's one of his worst ideas. Cutting taxes, good idea. Cutting regulatory burdens, good idea. Getting all these wasteful things out of government, getting rid of the parts of the federal government spending and federal government workforce that don't seem to make sense.
Sure.
All of those are good ideas. Tariffs, not necessarily a good idea. And the one other thing I'd mention is, Jeff also talked about this, the impact on the markets. One thing that's clear with businesses and how they plan for the future is what you want is some degree of certainty. Right. Even if the policy is really bad, just have that policy and stick with it. The companies will just, okay, it's a bad policy, but we know it's in place, we're going to deal with it. You don't want rapidly changing policies that make it impossible to plan. That was one of the problems, speaking of the Great Depression era. In addition to tariffs, you had Franklin Roosevelt, who would come in and come up with these grandiose plans, most of which weren't all that good, but then when they didn't work, he would come up with another grandiose plan. And so it became impossible for businesses to know what the future is going to hold. And that's terrible for the economy because you can't really plan how much are we going to spend on research and development. Are we going to build new factories? Are we going to expand our business into other areas? If you don't know basic details about what's the tax rate going to be, what are the tariffs going to be, it makes it much harder to plan, and that's bad economic news.
Sure. One of the things I've been hearing a lot about this tariff is, well, just buy American, and then you can avoid it. And if you know it's made here, then no problem. But those raw materials, that the tariffs are going to hit the steel in the car that you bought that was made in South Carolina or whatever it is.
Right. I mean, when you're looking at some of these tariffs about basic items, one of the common ones that we talk about is steel.
Sure.
Where you wanted to help the American steel companies by having tariffs on foreign steel. Well, that's good for the people who work for an American steel company.
Right.
It's bad for those who work or who buy for anything that uses steel.
Right.
Because you're paying for higher priced steel, either the American steel that's higher priced that was being protected by the tariffs,
Sure.
or the foreign steel that you're paying the tariffs on. The same thing is true with sugar subsidies. We've seen tariffs that help sugar, which is good for those who are employed in that industry.
Right.
It's bad for anyone who has to use sugar and anything else.
Because now everything's more expensive.
More expensive.
Yeah.
And that has tended to be the case with tariffs, is they help a selected group that's in the business that's directly related to that tariff. It hurts anyone else who has to use that particular item as a supply in some other good.
Wow.
And it tends to be that you lose more jobs and have a bigger economic hit because of all of those other effects than the benefit that you get from helping that one particular group. It's the same thing that you see in targeted tax incentives.
Sure.
I mean, the tax incentive helps a particular company, but everyone else is paying for it, including their competitors.
Right.
And the same thing comes through when you're dealing with tariffs.
That's good.
And even the protected group, that protection is temporary because then they become stale in their competitive markets. And so
Right.
if they're ever to reemerge, then they don't have the actual competitive edge to actually deal with it. And they get kind of run over. So you see that example in some of the industries that we've had here. But also, if we're focused on increasing exports, because another thing beyond just the tariff rates and other non-tariff barriers that the Trump administration has been talking about has been the actual trade deficits that he's wanted to target. So that has been one alternative goalpost for what is the real plan here as far as where they want to be, what is their goal to do. If we were to have neutral trade deficits with every country, I'm not sure that would be economically feasible or beneficial. But even with exports, some of our biggest exports in the United States rely on a considerable amount of imported inputs to actually produce the exports. So the tariffs might actually have the effect of depressing exports because it increases the price to actually produce those goods in the United States, and then they're less competitive on the world market.
But I get the arguments.
Plus, you've got the retaliation. So once the other companies or other countries enact their tariffs, all your exporters are having to deal with their tariffs.
Right.
So they're paying more for the raw materials to produce their goods, which are then more expensive, which will then be more expensive in foreign markets where the tariffs have been employed because we started tariffs. It's a never-ending cycle that doesn't help anyone. And also, it's good that Jeff mentioned the whole thing about trade deficits, because I think any economist who's being honest will tell you that is not a good indicator of how well or poorly your economy is doing. Trade deficit sounds terrible, but look at the periods when we've had the best economy. We tend to have trade deficits. When we are in trade surpluses, all the other economic factors that you would want to be good tend to be worse. So trade deficit, while it sounds bad, is not really a bad thing for the economy.
It's a misnomer. We all have trade deficits with our local grocery store.
Right.
But we actually got a good in response to that. So the economics of this, especially they're understood incompletely on a retail level by a lot of people. They're misunderstood a little bit more completely, but still misunderstood at some of the policymaking level. And you see the influence of guys like Peter Navarro on the Trump administration. You have people on the other side of that, where you've got Elon Musk, I think, actually calling Navarro a dummy, so to speak. And then Scott Bessent apparently was on the other side of that. So I think Trump, at the end of the day, for the announcement that came yesterday, he's a pragmatist, so he's loved tariffs forever. I think I've heard him say in person, "Tariff is my favorite word in the English language." And so,
unnerving.
And you can find tapes of him talking about how much he loves tariffs from 30, 40 years ago. So that's definitely something that he's in favor of. But when he sees the cards that he has been dealt, or the kind of hand that he's created with all of this, and then he looked at different moving factors and thought the most pragmatic thing to do would actually be to come out here and do a 90-day pause for everybody. And he's kind of blown it all up, and I think that his real strength is not necessarily that, he planned X, Y, Z, and he knew 5 steps ahead what he was going to do. but that he is so comfortable in the chaos that he can blow it all up and then have the confidence that I'm actually going to be able to pick out the best path forward while everyone else is running around in a state of panic. And so I think that may be some of what we saw yesterday.
That chaos is the interesting part to me, because I feel like Trump supporters are willing to bide their time on this because they're happy with what they've seen with Doge. They're happy with what they've seen at the border. And they're willing to give him a chance to sort it out and figure out the best path forward. It is the emotion in this is really interesting in an economic policy. You don't see public emotion pop up in an economic policy like this, but it is that feeling that the United States has been taken advantage of in the global marketplace for years and years and years because of its prosperity and generosity and all of these things. People feel like they've been stepped on, and they're relying on him to stand up for them on that global stage. It's whether tariffs are the way to do it. And I think they trust him at this point.
Yeah, I think they've seen a pattern that they recognize, so that they're hopeful and in some cases very confident, in some cases maybe overconfident that this is going to work out too, because he has a pattern of kind of blowing things up, and there is this state of chaos, but he seems like he's calm in the eye of the storm, and then he pulls the rabbit out of the hat at the end of the day. We'll see if that's the case here. Obviously, they are still working on those other ends. So I was looking at some executive orders that came out from the White House just yesterday, and there are orders in there dealing with regulations, like sunset and review regulations for the whole energy industry, just to make sure. So they're working on these kind of things that will have an actual kind of depressive effect on prices in the United States, to have us have more production. And at the end of the day, the best thing to affect any trade balances is to actually make it easier and less expensive to produce things here in the United States. And so they're working on that end while we're all paying attention to the tariffs. The other things are going on too. Maybe we'll get to talk about tariffs less in the future and more about these kind of regulatory reforms that will have such an impact.
Sure. Can you bring us up to date on what's happening in some lawsuits? There's some lawsuits we've been following really closely, particularly the Supreme Court race, the North Carolina Supreme Court race between Justice Griffin and Justice Riggs. Tell me what the latest is on that.
Sure. The latest is the case is now basically on pause. The State Court of Appeals late last week came out with the ruling that would have forced the State Board of Elections to go back, look at most of the 65,000 ballots that have been challenged, and give those people a chance to provide the information that they'd have to provide to have their votes counted. Basically, the Court of Appeals split 2-1, but the two-judge majority had said that they agreed with Jefferson Griffin that the ballots that he challenged shouldn't be counted. And one category, they said the people who'd never lived in North Carolina, they weren't going to give them a chance to count at all. Those would go away. That's only a couple hundred votes. But the others, they said, look, the precedent says we could throw all of these votes out, but we're not going to do that. We're going to tell the State Board of Elections to set up a process over 15 days that people could provide the information they would need to provide, and then their votes would count. If they don't provide the information, you throw the votes out. So that could change the vote totals very substantially in this race. So that order came out from the Court of Appeals.
Is that the 5,700-ish that didn't put in an ID?
It's two separate groups. It's the 60,000 plus who didn't have the driver's license number or last four digits of Social Security number in their voter registration, which is the largest group. And then there are the 5,500 who were overseas voters who didn't provide photo ID. Both of those groups would be given a chance over a 15-day period to provide the necessary information so their votes would count. That's what the Court of Appeals said. And the Court of Appeals, as part of its order, basically said the mandate in the case, which is what transfers it from one court to another, was going to take effect by the end of the day, Monday.
Oh, wow.
And so it was quick turnaround. The State Board of Elections and Justice Riggs went to the Supreme Court, filed paperwork over the weekend, and said, hey, let's have a temporary stay. Even Judge Griffin, who's on the other side of the case from us, agrees, or he says he doesn't object to a stay. So on Monday afternoon, the state Supreme Court issued a stay. Nothing's happening in the case right now, and the next thing that will happen is for the state Supreme Court to decide a couple of things. One, whether to issue this order called a writ of supersedes that would block what the appeals court did. State Board of Elections and Allison Riggs are asking for that. And then the second piece is, does the state Supreme Court take the case?
Right.
There's a petition from both the state board and from Riggs for the state Supreme Court to take that case. We're still waiting to see what's happening on that. There's been really no timeline set on when that's going to happen. And the next thing that you would expect is to see some sort of court filing from Jefferson Griffin responding to the request for the writ of supersedes and the petition for the Supreme Court to take up that case. So once we see that, then the Supreme Court will rule, and then you'll probably see a timeline of when they're going to finalize something. But it really is up in the air what's going to happen then. And then the other thing you were mentioning about in terms of court cases that are interesting, very briefly, redistricting.
Okay.
By my count, there are 4 different lawsuits right now that are challenging North Carolina's election maps that are still active. 3 of them had some activity within the last week or so. In 2 of them that have been consolidated before a 3-judge panel in the Triad. One of them challenges North Carolina's congressional map. The other one challenges the congressional map and the State House and Senate maps. There was an order that came out this week from the 3-judge panel that did 2 things. It threw out some of the districts that have been challenged, saying that the plaintiffs in the case, the NAACP and Common Cause, they didn't identify any members who lived in those districts, so they don't have any standing to sue. If you're not,
you need a plaintiff.
Yeah, you have to have a plaintiff in the district. They didn't identify plaintiffs in those districts, so 20 of the districts will get thrown out of the case. The second piece of it that was interesting was part of the argument was something called malapportionment, where you have too many people or too few people in a district to comply with one person, one vote standards, and the court threw that out, saying that the plaintiffs didn't provide evidence to show that that any difference in the percentages was due to something nefarious rather than just traditional redistricting principles. So that's the development. Now, practically, even though they threw out a bunch of those districts, if the plaintiffs were to win on any of these districts, they're going to have to be redrawn anyway, so it's going to affect most of the map. But that was a significant development. And then a third case had a development, and that is the only one that's in the state courts, where former Supreme Court Justice Bob Orr wants the courts to declare that there's a state constitutional right to fair elections. And so he's challenging some election maps based on that principle. He lost at the Superior Court level, but now it's at the State Court of Appeals. And we saw some court filings this week where the legislative leaders who are defending their maps are basically bashing his case again, saying, look, it's completely thrown out by what the state Supreme Court has already said. It's already said we're not going to deal with fairness. It's a political question, not something a judge could deal with. So Court of Appeals, you should uphold the ruling that was against this case. So all of those are going to be playing out in the weeks and months ahead.
All right, we're going to be watching those really closely. Also, please make sure you check out carolinajournal.com. We've got some things unfolding at the North Carolina Senate. The Senate passed a bill this week banning DEI on campuses. So we're going to be watching that really closely. All the details are on carolinajournal.com. And they've also passed a bill called the Dave Act that expands the state auditor's role. Dave Act, Dave Bullock, it's the state auditor, expands their role on finding waste in state government. Now, this is something we saw in Carolina Journal's poll that most North Carolinians are in favor of, finding some efficiencies there in state government to be good stewards of taxpayer money. But what does this mean, and what kind of bandwidth would the state auditor have to do it? All of that is on carolinajournal.com. Drop a comment here if you want to weigh in on these.
And probably worth mentioning really quickly that we learned this week that we're likely to see some action fairly soon on the state budget. State Senate Leader Phil Berger saying that the House and the Senate have agreed on a budget spending number, which is really the first step toward getting that done.
Yeah, and this seems early in the process to have the budget, is it?
It's not super early, but it is relatively early. Usually you don't see a whole lot of action until the tax money numbers come in, which happens after the April 15th tax filing, or in this case, May 1st. To see it happen before that is a little early.
All right, we're going to be watching that really closely. Check out carolinajournal.com and let us know what you think. Make sure you drop a comment and subscribe. Talk to you soon. Did you learn something? Make sure you subscribe to Carolina Journal's YouTube channel and watch the Debrief every week, where we're going to be breaking down everything happening in your state government. And check out carolinajournal.com for the latest breaking news.